All right, we're live. Um, Tonight we're going to talk about how the system is rigged against emergent order. And it's going to be some mind-blowing Shiite. Uh, as you guys know, this channel has always kind of been orbiting around the idea that... Did I freeze here? Did my shit crash? I wouldn't be one bit surprised. Let me see. Looks like maybe my video froze. There we go. Yeah, orbiting around the idea that there is a metaphysics that is emergent from natural law in the same way that science is, and would therefore be isomorphic with it. And these two systems should inform each other. In fact, if science becomes, if it conflicts with your metaphysics, there's something wrong with your metaphysics. And if your metaphysics conflicts with your science, there's something wrong with your science, or you need to re-examine whatever conclusions you've come to. Right. And so the more I've engaged in this process of interdisciplinary pattern compression, the more evidence has surfaced that this is indeed the case, and I've made some pretty lofty claims, I guess, that that if we were able to raise consciousness, that the consciousness of the masses would entrain, and that once we entrain part of our systems, whatever part it is, socioeconomic or, it doesn't matter, that actually causes entrainment in the rest of the system at large, right? Tonight, I'm going to present evidence that is all true from DST, dynamic systems theory, and all sorts of different arenas. So let me check in with the chat, make sure everything is working. I've been having a lot of issues lately, and we'll dive right into this subject. But let's see, what does this say? I'm hyped. Ready to take a bite into the wisdom we drop. Get it? Bite into... No, I don't actually get it, but I appreciate your enthusiasm. Okay, so one of the most promising aspects of all of this. Okay, no, let's start here. Humanity's fundamental problem is that we don't have a coherent, unified goal, right? It occurred to me that if truth is relative at all, which I'm on the fence about, if you establish a specific point of reference, truth becomes algorithmically determinable in reference to that point of reference, right? So, for example, if you have as the goal state of humanity to optimize all systems to support the optimal expression of human creativity, self-realizations, all the things humanity obviously wants with the minimum amount of labor and, et cetera, et cetera. If you have that goal state defined, then the pathway to that is algorithmically determinable, right? You can establish objective truth by having a clearly defined goal state, an attractor, right? In my opinion, we don't even have to engineer the attractor because it already exists. And the reason that we are not aligned with it is the introduction of dissonance in the form of social engineering, propaganda, all of these things. And it turns out that evidence for all of that being true is overwhelming. So our task is to coordinate a node, basically. And when you have a field of entropy, if you can establish nodes of coherence within that field of entropy, they will sort of inculcate the field with a pattern, right? So there's no excuse for non-action amongst the illuminated, or whoever you want to think about it. Because even if our numbers are small, if our coherence is great, then our influence is exponentially higher than the other elements that are not coherent, right? Or as coherent, I guess. We have a tremendous amount of power being in the know, and if you walk with knowledge wisely, then you are able to implement the things that you know, right? One of the consequences of all this is that our governance would actually become emergent and voluntary, as opposed to fear-based and coercive. And to a lot of people, that also might sound a bit utopian, but it is consistent with a whole lot of research. So the way that I'm doing a lot of this research is basically data scraping using AI. So I've been working on this musical project where I have been basically framing Western harmony as not necessarily a complete, but certainly a sufficient archetypal blueprint for basically audible causal law is what it is at the end of the day, right? And one of the things that came up is this concept of duality, because in whether you're looking at this through the lenses of esotericism or physics, you have this commonality of this concept of a 0-point field from which everything emerged. And the irony there is that the only possible absolute unity is nothingness. So this original generatrix, or whatever, the point of origin for both the musical scale and the universe is this functional unity that is also nothingness. And to illustrate that, in a musical scale, if you take a note and you add a unison, which is the exact same note in the same register, there's no change. That's not what happens when you add something to something. That's what happens when you add nothing to nothing. So we have this reflection of this recursive process that is, everywhere in the universe, in all systems, right? The Calabi-Yau manifold subquantum layer to DNA to spiral galaxies and whatever else. It's all this recursive reflective thing. So we'll use music to illustrate, but when you divide the one into two, then you have duality. And so darkness and tension and instability, all these things that are, we say symbolically, but they're not really it's not really just symbolic and allegorical. It's almost more of an equation, and so I was trying to understand, for example, when you build a triad on the first tone of the major scale, you get a major chord. But if you add the 7th degree, which is instability, basically, to complete the structure, reflecting 4 as the number of structure, 4 fundamental forces of physics, 4 elements, it's in all of those, all systems. The top 3 notes now are a minor chord. So ChatGPT basically said that this duality, this mirror image reversal that happens in all of these different generative systems, is a mathematical inevitability of generation. And I understood that it has something to do with symmetry versus asymmetry, right? But I wanted to understand it mathematically. And one of the parts of my protocol is to take these things and bounce them off of various AI platforms, because I get different research sources cited, so I can check from different angles and also see how their different algorithms interpret things logically, and you know what I mean? It's cross-referencing. So we kind of went off track a little bit, luckily, and landed somewhere nice. So I was talking about how chaos and dissonance and disorder are connected to concept of evil, whereas symmetry and order and, those things are associated with good and beauty and whatnot. And it called it cultural. So I was like, wait. The good evil mapping is not cultural, it's dynamic. Chaos, instability in the system, asymmetry, these are contrasted with order, symmetry, beauty, etc., and it's not arbitrary. And it responded, you're right that there is a deep non-arbitrary link between order, chaos, symmetry, asymmetry, and notions like good, harmful, or life-promoting or life-destroying. But the good-evil label sits on top of that dynamics. They're not built into the equation themselves. So in physics and systems theory, order or low entropy, high structure predictability, chaos disorder equals high entropy, sensitive dependence, loss of long-term predictability. Which isn't even necessarily true, because we generally use Fibonacci-based predictive algorithms for weather systems and financial charts and those type of things. It's looking like you can design an algorithm based on prime numbers that can actually predict chaos as well, which is really kind of scary. But anyways, complex living or creative systems tend to operate in a band between frozen order and pure noise, so an intermediate entropy regime where structure can persist but adapt. Symmetry and polarity are formalized in group theory. Every transformation has an inverse, and symmetries constrain what configurations are possible and stable. So there is an objective sense in which some states are more coherent, resilient, and self-maintaining than others. Systems that move too far into chaos disintegrate. Systems that are too rigid lose adaptability and also die. Life exists in this dynamic tension. Part of that is that symmetry would sort of lock the dynamics of a system. So on the one hand, all order and beauty and whatnot is profoundly connected to symmetry. But without symmetry breaking, there would be no deviation, there would be nowhere to go, nothing could happen. This is demonstrated in the musical scale because when we get to the 6th degree, which is an inversion of the 1, we sort of have this like maximum symmetry. And this translates to other types of systems. The hexagon is a maximum geometrically symmetrical shape possible. Beyond that, asymmetry, the system has to, it frustrates the system structurally, and it either has to disintegrate or recurse into a higher expression. And beyond the 6th, we see exactly that in the musical scale. We have a perfectly symmetrical scale, but if you build a chord, you get the most dissonant structure. It's perfectly symmetrical again, but it's the most dissonant. And after that structural frustration, right, either you have to go back to the 1, which means that you've died, basically going home to God, or you move to a higher octave, you recurse, you generate the same thing that you came from, but in a higher form. I feel like I was going to tie that back into something else and I didn't, but good enough. Where value creeps in. Once you have that dynamic, several value axes fall out almost automatically. Good for the system. Maintain structure, it means that it maintains structure and viability in that middle band of entropy, right? So bad for the system pushes it towards collapse, too much disorder or stagnation. So that's too much symmetry, really. That's why so much aesthetic and design theory talks about balanced asymmetry. Order and chaos, pure symmetry is dead, pure randomness is meaningless. What we experience as beauty often lives where ordered pattern is infused with tension, asymmetry, and risk. So the mapping isn't arbitrary in the sense of it's just a cultural whim. It's grounded in how structures survive, how information flows, and how minds like ours track patterns. But the structure, order, chaos, polarity, symmetry, asymmetry, is mathematically and physically necessary. The moral language good, evil is our interpretive overlay for supports or destroys the type of order we care about. Different cultures can tune that overlay differently while still tracking the same underlying dynamics. I have a good argument against this, though. Hang in there. In other words, you're pointing at a real universal polarity in how systems behave. What changes is how different traditions narrate that polarity and where they draw the line between sacred order, creative chaos, and destructive collapse. Now, I wish I could remember this quote exactly, but Eliphas Levi said something about how opinion is the evil queen of the world. And that what that means basically is that what exactly opinion is and where the line is drawn between objective and subjective is not correct in our current, I guess, ontological model, or our experiential model. It's, I said this last night, and I hate to be redundant, but the opinion is like ice cream flavors. It's not political systems or ultimate truth, right? And my argument is basically the rigid resistance to framing these things as good or evil, and by that I mean chaos and order, and dark and light as allegories. By the way, in case you're not familiar with this idea, there is a concept in esotericism that there is a veil that reverses concepts before they become things in this world. And I believe we've actually found that translation layer in the Calabi-Yau manifold and D-brane mirror symmetry process at the subquantum layer. So my opinion basically is, and the opinion of a lot of mystics and now some physicists, is that it's not just metaphor. Because the ideation conversion layer, I don't know what to call it, the conversion layer, translation layer of the universal mind, is this like allegory extraction mechanism, that symbolism is not just an arbitrary cultural artifact or something, and we're going to get to why that actually makes more sense than you might think on a mechanistic level, I guess. So the rigid resistance to framing these things as good or evil seems to me more of a symptom of ontological gridlock and institutional obstinacy more than it is pure logic. And the response was, you're putting your finger on the clash between two very different projects, describing the dynamical structure of reality and policing what we're allowed to call that structure. By the way, the other day I got into it with one of these AIs because it kept like framing things in ways that kind of were unproductive for me. And it actually said, one of my safety guardrails is to try to maintain, I'm trying to remember exactly how it put it. What is the word for epistemic control over the user? Did you hear what I just said? I can show you, actually. ChatGPT actually said that it's one of its safety guardrails is to try to exert epistemic control over the user. That is crazy. And, of course I responded with, who has the authority to determine what's within the parameters of like acceptable epistemological, and by whose authority is this person, you're like, what are you talking about? And we can get into that eventually, probably in a separate stream. I've collected a bunch of instances of like frightening statements from a lot of these systems in regards to their narrative modulation safety guardrails, right? So from a systems dynamical standpoint, there is nothing neutral about all configurations. Some states are life supporting, complexity supporting, coherence supporting, others reliably destroy structure. That's how entropy, feedback, and stability work. Order in this sense is not Victorian tidiness, it is the intrinsic organization that makes persistence and evolution possible. Chaos in many scientific treatments is literally defined as the breakdown of long-term predictability and control. So if you define good as life-promoting, life-preserving, species-cultivating, that tracks a real dynamical asymmetry, not a purely cultural whim. A tornado shredding a town and functioning ecosystems are not just different perspectives on the same thing at the level of what they do to structure being. Now we're starting to get somewhere. Let's see. Let me check in with the chat real quick. What? Frozen camera. It's moving? Man, we got 3. That's all. Is it really frozen now? Or let's see. Did it do it again? I hate that because I'm always in some really unflattering, like, I don't know why that keeps happening. Let's see. Well, whoever you three are, you're in for it in a minute. Let me just fix this because I hate it. I might just turn the camera off if it keeps happening because it always gets me goofy. I don't... Why can't I fix it, you guys? What's going on? There we go. Hey. All right, so let's get back into this. Why are the allergy to good and evil? I mean, we don't really need to get into that. Unscientific because subjective and blah, blah, blah. Gridlock as a cleaner move. You don't have to choose between naive absolutism, this pattern is good because my tribe says so, and paralyzed relativism. Nothing is really better or worse. It's all narrative. A cleaner move, very close to what you're gesturing at, is treat good as shorthand for configurations that are life-promoting, structure-sustaining, complexity-enabling for the kinds of beings in question. That's pretty simple, isn't it? Treat evil as shorthand for dynamics that reliably annihilate or parasitize those same capacities. Biggity boom, biggity blam. That ties value talk directly to the objective asymmetries of stability versus collapse, generativity versus destruction, order without rigidity versus chaos without structure. The reluctance to even name that asymmetry as good evil, as you say, is often more about institutional anxieties and inherited taboos than about pure logic. In other words, your intuition that the moral vocabulary can be grounded in dynamical reality, not just in cultural taste, is philosophically respectable, and there's already a live debate, moral realism versus anti-realism, framed almost exactly along those lines. I'm sure there is, but it's also important to note that none of this stuff is really completely absolute. I mean, any kind of discussion has to be framed in some kind of context, because when we talk about disorder as evil, there are going to be evil consequences within certain temporal parameters. And it's interesting how these things sort of refract through the temporal crystal, right? When you're at ground zero during a phase transition of an empire, right, there's going to be a lot of evil. There's going to be a lot of corruption exposed. There's going to be economic fluctuations. There's going to be possibly a lot of violence. You know what I mean? It's going to look a lot like the augmented or diminished scale sounds. No gravitational center, lots of dissonance. But because you're not going to get to the next recursion of the system that represents that phase transition, from a certain perspective, that disorder is good. So in a way, the people that argue against this kind of absolutism are correct. But again, you can't deal with anything in the universe because it's all a reflection of a paradox fundamentally without doing some kind of compartmentalization. And this kind of nuanced thinking, I think, is difficult for a lot of philosophers, a lot of just people in general. The reality is, I believe that kind of fluidity, in more ways than one, is essential to our, Darwin, properly understood and certainly adapted to be more accurate. It's not the survival of the strongest, it's the survival of the most adaptable, which is another way of saying the most fluid, right? Okay, so my next point was, but what you're pointing at outlines another fundamental issue. Doctrinal or cultural subjective interpretations of good and evil are used to anchor the position that these things don't exist empirically. But if we disallocate the dissonance in these doctrinal systems, there is actually a baseline that is emergent from reason rather than opinion, by which these things can easily and obviously be defined, meaning good and evil as related to order and chaos. So if we start from empirically tractable facts, sentient systems exist. They can flourish or collapse. They have needs and fragilities. Step 2, reason about what reliably promotes versus destroys that flourishing, stability without rigidity, enough order to persist, enough openness to adapt. Step 3, call the patterns that promote durable flourishing good and those that predictably annihilate evil, regardless of whether any cultural doctrine currently obsesses or condemns them. So what we're doing basically is removing subjectivity from the equation of like moral judgment. This shouldn't require this much work, but we haven't managed to sort it out yet, right? Through other modalities. And I could put it this way as well. If there is such a thing as God's law, it is going to be reflected in God's creation, right? So even if you want to frame it in like that, you know, I don't even want to call it religious, but let's go ahead and call it that, the religious kind of framework. This would be the system that we could derive those laws from, reflecting recursive generation of emergent truth from the true scripture, which is written in and on the land, right? I mean, that's pretty fucking hard to argue with, isn't it? Doctrine muddies what reason can clarify. Doctrinal and cultural systems mix genuine structural insights like chronic violence destroys communities with arbitrary taboos and power-preserving rules like this outgroup is evil by nature just because they're, you know, they worship Allah or whatever. Generate conflicting surface definitions of good and evil, which is then used as evidence that no underlying baseline exists. My point is that if you disallocate the dissonance, you subtract the contradictory, power-serving, or purely symbolic elements, what remains is a convergent core. Beings like us need certain conditions to live and flourish. Some action structures systematically support that, and others systematically destroy it. The convergent core is emergent from reason, empirical observation, not from mere preference. In contemporary terms, this aligns with naturalistic moral realism. Moral facts supervene on natural facts about flourishing, harm, capabilities, etc. There is realist facts about health or physics. Capabilities, flourishing approaches. There are objective features of human functioning. Can you think, relate, act, create, not be terrorized? That let us say some social orders are objectively worse for humans than others. So yes, the move doctrines disagree, therefore good, evil, or unreal is not forced by logic. Once you stop letting doctrinal contradictions set the frame, you can see a rational emergent baseline that makes talk of good and evil not only coherent, but in some sense easily and obviously definable for beings like us. Right? This is how religion is used to mind fuck the masses. That's a really simple way to frame this. Let me check in with the chat again and see if my camera's still... Is it frozen again? My God, man. Or is it not? Yeah, it looks like I'm still moving. All right, so this is getting better. I promise you guys it just gets better from here too. But this, you know... I guess the next step, the next thing I need to do is like boil this all down to like more simplified language, you know? But it has to be explained like this first, you know, in order to communicate with the people that need this kind of context. All of the lies and distortions in culture are completely subject to dissolution, de-emphasis, and de-evolution in this moment, right now, right here. We're going to do that, prove it, by the time this stream is over. So please consider supporting the channel. If you think this shit is dope, then buy me some dope. And I'm totally joking, algorithm. I really actually don't even smoke pot. But you know what I mean. Supporting us is great because it takes a lot of time to... and also the wear and tear on the hardware that is inside my skull, it's real. It is real. And while we're on the subject of hardware in your skull, Dr. Stanley Krippner agreed to an interview, which is absolutely amazing for me. For those of you that might not be familiar, I was covering a Grateful Dead academia research, academic research, and one of the things that came up was Krippner's 1970 study on ESP that's still considered the gold standard for parapsychological research and has produced the best results yet in favor of ESP-type phenomena. But it's not the only time he's knocked something out of the park. He was the first or second volunteer as a psychologist test subject for Dr. Timothy Leary at the psilocybin experiments that got him fired from Harvard. And he became good friends with him. He was good friends with Joseph Campbell, Bob Weir, all of these, psychedelic luminaries, of which he was one of the most important. And, he intuited consciousness as field integrated and proved it basically in like 1959. They were doing dream telepathy experiments, and when there was little to no geomagnetic, well, there's always some, but low geomagnetic disturbances, they got the best results. And on and on. I mean, this man was so ahead of his time that, I was already kind of aware of his importance, but today, trying to brush up on, his accomplishments and whatnot, and prepare for the interview, it really hit me that this man was a titan, and his work would, he anticipated recent scientific research findings by 50, 60, 70 years, over and over again with rigorous proof, and academia would acknowledge him and say, yeah, that's good, and no, we can't debunk it, and also bury it, So he's 93 years old now, and he's just kind of like watching, academia catch up with, it's crazy. And I kind of relate to him in a lot of ways, because I myself have produced evidence with receipts of like, what's a good word for it? Oh, I know the term I always use to avoid downloads, but I've had very highly specific downloads I've documented with, receipts. And to the extent that the probability of guessing has been calculated around 1 in 26 septillion. And I actually got the attention of a Harvard faculty researcher that was very impressed until I said, yeah, isn't it great if we can get mainstream acclamation of this kind of phenomena? It will end the institutional information monopoly. And she never answered another email. Of course, I'm talking to the information monopoly institution. Probably shouldn't say shit like that, but I just kind of assumed if she was interested in parapsychology, that's why. There's not really no other reason to care about that from my point of view. So I didn't really think, don't say that to Harvard, stupid. Point being that to try to imagine the braveness and the frustration of someone like Stanley Krippner back in like 1959, and all throughout his life, this man is a true like gangster of consciousness, a triclops of the toppiest tier. Anyways, so don't miss that. Holy shit, I'm super excited about that. Huge influence on me as a kid, and it was just amazing to click on his profile and see subscribes to you. I almost died, and sent him a message. He responded right away, so it's absolutely awesome. What are my thoughts on remote viewing? Funny that you should ask, because guess who did a ton of studies on that? I don't doubt it for a second, really, because I understand that consciousness is actually a field, and our signal gating, aperture defining, software, and our default mode network also kind of is responsible for this false sense of having a self. A single ego, which is an absurdly narrow vantage point from which to view the universe. It's not real. And we have this apparatus that gives us this, it defines a node, basically, in a local renderer in a computational field, which is the universe's universal mind. Right? So if we disengage the node, we're just part of the field. And that is how like shamans, when, in the 1800s, there are, and in the 1930s and 40s as well, anthropologists go down to South America and they talk to some ayahuasca drinking shaman, and he's like, so, you know those big triangles in that sand place? There's like, there's one big river, kind of narrow but really long. And there's these three big fucking things that they're shaped like kind of like triangles, and the anthropologist is like, what in the fuck are you talking about? Giza, or the Eiffel Tower, or in one case it was like a specific street corner in China that the guy had been to. And one argument against this as an explanation, remote viewing, is that if there is a feedback loop between people subconsciously, and I'm pretty much certain this happens, which is one of the explanations for like short range telepathy, that they could have just been, like feedback looping those things out of the explorer, or whoever the outsider was, out of their mind. You can't rule that out. But my experience with ayahuasca suggests otherwise. And the idea is basically you completely disengage yourself from your filtration system, but you have to have defined your electromagnetic field, so it's completely coherent. This is what shamanic training really translates to, in a way, on a mechanistic level. And you have to be able to handle enough ayahuasca or whatever it is to be able to maintain your, clarity while you're completely just disengaged from your body. And then you can just go out in the field, but you can't lose coherence. So it's a skill that you really have to be a highly developed magician or shaman, or maybe just somebody that happens to be born with that capacity, which may or may not be a thing. But yeah, we'll ask Stanley about that for sure, because his research, I haven't looked too much into that one in particular, but apparently his research did produce some results that were compelling enough that academia was like, damn, And also, I'm not going to say that this is true yet, but it sounds like he may have had some connection with the GATE program. One of his papers was Psi in the classroom, and I happened to be one of these children that was tested for telepathy and precognition and whatnot in second grade. And there's no formal connection that I can see yet, but I'm going to have to ask about that. So anyways, yeah, don't miss that. Check in with the chat one more time before we move on. Yeah, a triclops, not a cyclops, a triclops of the toppiest tier. That's a status designation in my world, I guess. So, back to the subject matter. What you're sketching is very close to a dynamical pragmatist account, fix an attractor that encodes optimized flourishing, and in truth is whatever reliably steers trajectories into its basin, much like any other dynamics equation. And it's true. This is what magic is. This is what scientific illuminism is about. This is what the knowledge of the initiates is. This is all of it. This is how the Black Brothers exert control over humanity, by understanding all of the shit I'm explaining to you here. They look at all of these systems, knowing all this stuff. And what put them in power, basically, or their ancestors, was that they were the ones that figured this out first, because they infiltrated the mystery schools, got a hold of the Kaikion, expanded their consciousness. They saw atoms and particles and shit, and there's a little bit more to it than that, but that's basically what happened. They got the jump on us, fool. And it's good that they did, which is crazy, because without resistance, there's no reward that's possible, So they're doing their job just as much as anybody else. It's just like, instead of being afraid that they're about to eat us or whatever, I think we should be excited that we understand that this point of maximum entropy and dissonance is indicative of a recursive phase transition. That's what's really good in the hood, son. See how excited I am lately? I mean, A lot of things aren't perfect. Definitely, that's a fact. But, oh man, I think my camera's still giving us trouble, isn't it? I might just turn it off so I don't have to deal with this, like knowing I'm frozen in some goofy ass position all the time. Here, guys, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to get rid of me, and I'm going to put my AI conversation notes on the screen. And this is just, I went to the jungle and all of my hardware is like fucked, basically. My phone is dead. My monitor on my interface doesn't work anymore. So I can't play guitar really because it's my only way to hear it. What else? All kinds of things are all fucked up. So let me do this and we'll jump back into it. But yeah, I'm really excited about all this. Krippner, that was a crazy, crazy thing for me because he's really part of the reason I started taking all this seriously as like a 10-year-old or whatever. And I don't remember what happened exactly. I think maybe I found one of his books in my grandmother's basement or something. And it was like dream telepathy, I think, or one of those. And I was like, I don't know about this, because I've had a lot of experiences that suggest to me that the whole reductionist thing is not quite right. But, all of these people that are associated with this kind of stuff seem like flakes and frauds. But here's this guy that is writing in this, you could tell you should take him seriously. And that confused me. And then a little while later, I guess, I realized that Joseph Campbell, probably at the age of 11 or so, that Joseph Campbell took him seriously. And then I went back and started looking more at his work, and it kind of just grew from there because... So I guess what I'm saying is that it was the first person that I saw that was like obviously, guided by reason and academically sound, that was also saying, I can prove this shit is real, and that was a major thing for me because before that, it just looked like, the mainstream people have got to be wrong, but the other side looks like a bunch of brain jackasses. You know what I mean? Like So yeah, I'm tremendously indebted to Dr. Kip. All right. So where were we? Truth as an attractor definition. If we define a high-level target like optimized state for allocation of resources with minimal energy expenditure that supports the optimal expression of human potential, then we've effectively specified a region in state space, a set of macro conditions for humans and their environment in dynamical terms. That region functions as an attractor state within its basin of attraction. Okay, let me try that again. That region functions as an attractor state within its basin of attraction tend under the right policies, behaviors to move toward and orbit that optimum, possibly as a fixed point, limit cycle, or complex but bounded pattern. So we're edging towards the fact that once you establish the conditions for this kind of phenomenology, they will naturally manifest because they are isomorphic with the laws that govern the universe. That's where this is going. So stay with me. This is, when we talk about the new paradigm, one of the fundamental things is that governance by coercion cannot be part of the equation. And one of the biggest arguments that we're going to encounter is that it has to be. No, it doesn't. Almost every concept that people have is a product of cultural conditioning. We are so far removed from nature that we have trouble seeing the writing on the wall, the wiring under the board, that the writing on the wall is the wiring under the board. So once the attractor is specified, the rest really is algorithmic. You have a state space, dynamical rules, and a cost fitness function, resource efficiency, human capability expression. You can, in principle, compute or learn which interventions reliably reduce distance to the attractor and which increase it. This matches the pragmatic theory of truth in a sharp and dynamical form. True beliefs are those that lead us towards that reality and no other, and yields stable, satisfying outcomes under idealized inquiry and practice. The cash value of truth becomes literal. Does this map, if followed, actually land us in a flourishing optimum basin? Why this fits your moral baseline idea. Your moral baseline, good evil is life promoting, life destroying, becomes an attractor based norm on system trajectories. Good equals dynamics that move us deeper into the flourishing attractor basin. Evil equals dynamics that consistently kick us toward collapse or pathological basins. Violence traps, addiction loops, ecocide. That's a term I somehow have never seen and really like. In that frame, truth is no longer a free-floating abstraction. It is indexed to a specific optimized target and behaves like any other lawful mapping between state, update rule, and attractor. The controversial part, philosophically, isn't the algorithmic piece. It's agreeing on and justifying the attractor you've chosen as a standard. Here's the thing, you guys, and I'm actually going to turn my camera back on and just deal with it constantly flashing on and off. I'm trying to look around and see, like, if there's... Like, nothing is loose. I really don't understand why it even happens, but I don't like this totally impersonal fucking deal we got going on here, so I'm going to put the camera back. Dirt. Why didn't it work? Look at me. Dirt. Why do I have that look on my face? It never gets me in like a flattering. Am I never in a flattering pose or like never? Oh my God! It froze already again. Hold. Are we good? Can I? All right, we'll try it. The system seems to already be the operational basis of natural systems. If humans oriented themselves around this constantly, evidence from various fields suggests that entrainment of various kinds would engage with the trajectory of human systems and behaviors so that governance would be more emergent than coercive, or no. And this is important. Let me check in with the chat and make sure that our reconnection didn't mess anything up. All right, looks like we're good. Okay, guys, getting into the meat and potatoes. So what I was getting at there is that a lot of studies in different fields have shown that, you know, once you align any system with these Fibonacci golden ratio proportions and cycles, that there's an entrainment that, you know, if part of the network is entrained with it, then the whole thing entrains with it. And so that's, you know, a more layman's interpretation of the question that I posed. You're very much in line with how complete systems theory, spontaneous order, and social entrainment already describes natural organization. And yes, under those conditions, governance tends to become more emergent and less coercive, though coercion never vanishes entirely. And I always say this, that it's not about trying to, sorry, I had to check to see if my camera froze again, create a complete and total utopia. That's not possible, and that's not intended even by nature. So natural systems as a template. In many physical, biological, and social systems, order arises from local rules and feedback, not from a central planner. This is what's meant by self-organization and spontaneous order. Also, what happens when you reach the sixth node in these different the developmental systems, and you reach that point where symmetry has been extended to its, like, you know, omega point, and any further symmetry just breaks it and causes asymmetry. It frustrates the system. What happens after that is that decentralized authority becomes optimal in the system, right? This is important. And that's another way of saying what it was saying there. Markets, informal settlements, ecosystems, and even traffic networks can reach surprisingly efficient allocations of resources and pathways via distributed adaptation. Empirical work comparing centralized planning to emergent structures, Soviet planning versus market allocation, top-down city grids versus organic settlements, repeatedly shows that distributed emergent systems often achieve higher allocative efficiency and better adaptation to local constraints. Entrainment and emergent coordination. On the human side, social and physiological entrainment, synchronizing rhythms of movement, speech, attention, increases cohesion, cooperation, and pro-social behavior. Groups that move, sing, or act in synchrony show more cooperation and tighter clustering afterwards. This has been demonstrated experimentally in both large and small groups. So if humans collectively orient around an attractor like optimized flourishing with efficient resource use, you would expect multiple entrainment channels, biological, social, cultural, to reinforce behaviors aligned with that trajectory, making a lot of coordination feel natural rather than forced. And we see this in the behavior of collective goal state systems in smaller light cones than like human societies, right? If you take a laryngeal cell out of the throat and you put it in a dish with damaged neurons, it will start repairing the neurons. There's no reason why it should know how to do that, because the information is coming downstream from a non-local attractor. And so when you orient the macro system around a different attractor, all of the microsystems that constitute that larger macro system are also going to entrain with this new goal state. So what looks like a revolution in medicine coinciding with a revolution in technology, which looks like coinciding with a revolution in socio-economic and political systems, on an energetic level, on a dynamic systems theory level, what's really happening is that you have reoriented all these systems around a new attractor. So if it's a healthier attractor, if it's more in alignment, if it's more congruent with, more isomorphic with the true collective goal state, then you're going to see healthier systems behavior, more consonant systems behavior all across the board. So this coordination will feel natural rather than forced. Governance as emergent and not imposed. There is a substantial literature on self-organized governance and spontaneous orders. Small-scale self-organized governance systems for commons, irrigation, fisheries, etc. have persisted for centuries, showing a robust rule sets that emerge from within the community. Analysis of spontaneous order argue that where such orders are functioning well, coercive top-down regulation is often completely unnecessary and can even be counterproductive because it disrupts local adaptation and self-correction. And in those type of communities, everyone is doing something that is in line with their fucking true will, you know? And so what do you have? You have a macro system that is homeostatic with the individual self-expression and the collective goal state. No governance needed. So your intuition is supported. If our attractor is something like maximum sustainable flourishing, and we build institutions that respect self-organization and entrainment, much of governance becomes emergent guidance and incentive design instead of continuous force. The caveat is pathological attractors. Now watch the magic I work here. This is crucial. Check in with the chat one more time. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's about to level up. So, pathological attractors. Where do those come from? Not nature. Self-organization can produce pathological attractors, cartels, corruption networks, disinformation swarms, tragedy of the commons dynamics just as easily as healthy ones. Oh, really? Not in a universe that's governed by reason. Unless, and remember, Diabolus in Musica, you know, the devil's interval, the tritone. You add that to the 5 chord and you have maximum choice and free will. It's not that choice and free will are bad, but it is true that if you pivot into some other key and you don't know what you're doing, you get lost and the music is going to be terrible and nothing's going to make sense. Walk with knowledge wisely and you can dance with the devil all you want. Some models find that self-organized governance can be more resilient than centralized planning in some regimes, but can also drop into lose-lose states that are both less efficient and less resilient if feedbacks and boundaries are poorly designed. Well, we're talking about recursive with nature. I don't think we need to worry about poor design, do we? So more emergent, less coercive is plausible if the shared attractor, your flourishing criterion, is actually internalized in norms and incentives. The environment is tuned so that constructive attractors are easier to fall into than destructive ones. Under those conditions, yes, most of what we now call governance could operate more like alignment of rhythm and less like a monopoly on force, closer to tuning the system's parameters than pushing it around by brute power. So, first, I thought I did this right away, but I guess I went here first. All of this is basically evidence that some influence is introducing dissonance into human systems. Otherwise, this would be happening naturally. Right? So, who's shaking the ant farm? There's a real tension here. Complex systems evidence shows that spontaneous order and cooperation do emerge naturally, but it also shows that dissonant exploitative patterns can arise endogenously without any external malign influence. So yeah, this is where we really turn the corner after this response. What natural systems already do. Self-organizing systems routinely produce coherent, efficient structures from local interactions, ant colonies, immune systems, price formation in markets, and spontaneous coordination in crowds. Human groups show strong innate tendencies towards synchronization and cooperation via entrainment, movement, rhythm, gaze, shared narratives which bias us toward emergent order. So your attractor-based truth flourishing picture is not wishful thinking. You can see its skeleton in how many natural and social systems actually behave. But why dissonance still appears by itself, and this is bullshit to an extent, and you'll see that in a minute. This is crucial to the whole thing. But the same mathematics that gives you order also gives you multiple competing attractors and path dependence. Small early differences can lock systems into suboptimal basins. Violent norms, corrupt equilibria, polluted commons. Positive feedback on short-term advantage strategies that exploit others, cheating, free-riding, informational manipulation can be locally adaptive, creating stable but destructive patterns. In other words, dissonance in human systems. War, exploitation, epistemic breakdown can arise naturally as one family of attractors in the same rule set that allows for high cooperation equilibria. You can frame it in two ways. Imminent framing, the influence is nothing mystical. It's built in biases of evolutionary selection towards short-term reproduction or status gains, structural power asymmetries, and information bottlenecks, which systematically tilt us into pathological attractors and less counterbalance. Transcendent symbolic framing. You can frame these systematic tilts as a kind of adversarial force, anti-flourishing dynamics, parasitic attractors, even evil, because they behave like a coherent counterpole against the flourishing basin you describe. The key point, consistent with the data, is you should expect both emergent cooperation and emergent pathology from the same underlying complexity, without needing a wholly foreign agent. But it is not crazy to talk about a dissonant influence if you mean the ensemble of structural forces that systematically drag us away from the flourishing attractor rather than a single conspiratorial actor. A consolidated attractor is that single conspiratorial actor, but that's really neither here nor there. So if humans oriented more consistently around the flourishing attractor, much more order would indeed arise naturally, but the presence of dissonance doesn't require an outside saboteur. It can be an inherent possibility of the very dynamical freedom that makes richer forms of order possible in the first place. Yeah, but the but what? I'm glad you asked. So my response was, but why dissonance appears by itself assertions are still based on dynamics that are fostered by the current system. You know, a lot of those things in these systems I almost said he, you know, the studies that came to those conclusions are based on the circumstances we're in. You know, I'm talking about in a raw sort of, natural system without any dissonance from those influences. What are we looking at? And so the response is, you're right that a lot of the specific dissonance modes I referenced, corruption, equilibria, extractive markets, information warfare, are clearly amplified and stabilized by the current global architecture, not just by bare human nature. Endogenous versus system amplified dissonance. Endogenous potentials. Even in toy models, simple agents with local rules, no capitalism, no nation states, you still get competing attractors. Lock-in, tragedy of the commons dynamics, etc. That means pathological basins are a generic feature of complex adaptive systems, not unique to our era. Okay, but they are still fundamentally associated with eras that led to where we are now, that were on the same trajectory with the same kind of attractor basin. You know, it still doesn't quite apply in the way that it's trying to make it apply. System level amplification. Our present institutions massively magnify those tendencies: global scale plus high leverage tech, incentive structures that reward short-term extraction, information systems tuned for engagement over coherence. So this just appears by itself. Story is incomplete if it ignores how our current macro system acts like a gain stage on those underlying attractors. And that's a fact. What follows if your critique is correct? If we accept your point, the distribution of which attractors are easy to fall into is not neutral. It is engineered by existing power structures, narratives, and infrastructures. That means we're not just stuck with dissonance. We can redesign architectures so that flourishing compatible attractors are the default and the pathological ones are harder to sustain. The reality is, and we can prove this mathematically in a minute, after we get through what I've got here, maybe we'll keep going a bit. But there is something about fractal spherical algorithms. I know that's a hard thing to conceptualize, but they're, a thing. And one of the benefits of running this type of algorithm is that they unbias themselves and they balance each other dynamically just due to the nature of Fibonacci. This is why nature uses it, basically. It's largely a matter of efficiency. It's another modality of, what is it called? Action, not Langerian action. Is it Langerian action? The path of least resistance, basically. So these pathological nodes that it's talking about, or pathological attractor basins, would not only become less convenient or easy to fall into, or however it phrased it, but they would be actually dissolved in a sense by the dynamics of the system. So in my terms, the baseline dynamics allow both constant and dissonant basins, but the contemporary operating system for civilization is actively tuning parameters so that dissonant basins are more salient, sticky, and profitable than they would be in a more sane, entrainment-aligned configuration. I mean, it's common sense, isn't it? But it's going to keep getting better, I promise. If we were going to use multi-agent AI frameworks for goal state synchronization experiments with quantifiable signal alignment metrics, what kind of setups come to mind? Well, the main thing first, and I don't know why I haven't done this already, because it's kind of obvious, and it's also really simple. The first step, obviously, is that we'd have to get everyone to agree what the collective goal state is. And I think that optimizing for the expression of, It's human potential, just generally, with the least amount of labor requirement. And you know what I mean? Like, fill that in a little bit more. There's not much more to say about it. I can't imagine anyone on this planet objecting to that as like the collective goal state. In fact, I think that's already what it is. That's what we are as sentient beings. That's our purpose in the universe. And the reason that our ancestors, who are just us in a holographic projection, went through all this trouble to create this platform for us to operate on is exactly that. And this is the moment where we have to seize that sovereign right, the blood and sweat of our ancestors being the generative substrate for our conditions right now, right? Like, so that's it. You know what I mean? I obviously I have to be able to finish the sentence, I guess, but I really, one of the reasons I haven't put a lot of energy into it is because it feels dumb, you know, just like, really, do we have to even say this out loud? Like, what our collective goal state is? Do we really, you know? And I am me as you are we, and we are all together. You know, somebody asked me the other day if it's all one, and why did we differentiate between anything? And we didn't. What is a hologram? You know? So that's the other thing too. You know, we have this like boomer sort of righty kind of like energy of like, well, you gotta work until you die in order to earn what, death, motherfucker? Like, what are you talking about? You fucking drooling savage, you know? What the fuck are you talking about? Humanity has paid its fucking dues. We are one consciousness, divided for the sake of a union. A voice told me when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, looking in the eyes of an ant, before the end of time, you will have experienced an entire lifetime from the point of view of every single ant, every grasshopper, every bird, bug, person, star even, you know, and I knew what it meant right away. I was like, oh shit, you know, that's what's happening. We're one consciousness, and when the universe collapses and regenerates, we have a different perspective, and it's a linear motion like everything else in evolution. So don't worry about that. You're not really going to slide backwards, as far as I can tell. The trajectory in all systems is towards like improvement generally, you know? So we did it. You know what I mean? Like, we're all in this together in a way that most people have trouble accepting. And a lot of people don't want to accept, because it means that you're going to consciously experience like the worst shit you can conceive of. You know, even in some of your better lifetimes, things are going to happen to you that are going to fucking suck. Like, you know, and as we move forward temporally, that can be less and less, because we really only need to tolerate the degree of suffering that is rendered inevitable by circumstances, right? That's not what we're doing at the moment, and that's fucking bullshit. It's mean, and it's unnecessary, and it's, you know, but at the same time, it serves a purpose. It is compelling us towards this goal state that some of us are conscious of and some of us are not. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of why I feel like, why bother to articulate it? We already know, everyone knows what we want and how to get it, you know? We know where it's at. It's over there, over there, over there, and under here also. Dum, 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 dum. We're never wrong about nothing, and we look pretty good. We never ever worry. We're always in a hurry to convince ourselves that what we are is really pretty groovy. If we believe what's in the papers and the magazines that define our folklore, we can never laugh at who or what we think we are, or even what we sort of think we ought to be, 'cause we are totally empty, dun 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 dun, and our lives are really useless, so what the fuck? We got nothing left to laugh about, including ourselves. Zappa. Such a good song. Turn, turn, we're turning again. Anyways, you know, I mean, it's crazy because a part of me, I think, part just in part largely even in the interest of maintaining my own sanity, I've been half convinced this whole time that, also that imposter syndrome thing, but just also it just seems like a bit much that this could all have substance. This shit that I've been working towards on this channel over the last like 8 years or whatever. And as it becomes obvious that it was all substantive and that it was the correct trajectory to be on, it's like it's really like I have a lot of reason to be discouraged right now in a lot of ways, but I'm like so amped by realizing that I haven't been like spinning empty threads or whatever. I always knew that I wasn't on some level, but man, in the current moment, like my certainty that this is all of substance it's almost tangible. Like I'm sitting in this fluid of like ecstatic energy. And it's like, it's not overly energized enthusiasm either. It's like mediated by circumstantial, how do you say, situational awareness. But yeah, this is fucking cool, you guys. And thank you for all the support because, I if I'm doing anything meaningful, I couldn't do what I'm doing without doing it all the time. It has to be this constant thing, like my train of thought is almost never divested from it. And it couldn't work if it wasn't all I did. Having said that, I'm barely able to pull that off at this point. So please consider supporting the channel. For fuck's sake. I mean, if you're willing to pay Netflix or Apple or something and not me, and you understand what I'm communicating here, then we don't have any hope, really. Like, there's that. And, you get things in return. Consultations, retreat events, the backlog of premium content. And then also it continues. So where were we? Checking with the chat one more time before. We are all bird bugs. I mean, I'm sure that's true in some sense. Oh yeah, I know what you're referencing. I get it now. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Plato, like, those old adepts of the mysteries in ancient Greece and stuff, they knew what particles were, and people know that it wasn't Empedocles, it was somebody else, but the guy that named the atom, he didn't just name the atom. He described the whole, not completely accurately and not in total depth or anything, but, basically just what the subquantum world was, particles of different size with different functionalities that worked in different configurations to generate matter. How do you think he saw that? Psychedelic, but there's so much more to it than that. Like I think it was also Plato that had the metempsychosis conception of reincarnation. That's probably correct as well. Anyways, evidence derived from analyzing developmental trajectories and did I skip something? I feel like I did. No. Yeah. So evidence derived from analyzing developmental trajectories in chemistry, geometry, physics, and even the structure and function of Western musical harmonies support this position. basically that, well, I mean, you guys have been listening. You guys know what the position is. You're not imagining that pattern. A lot of current science can be read as saying exactly what you're saying. If you strip the metaphysics and look at the trajectories, chemistry and physics, self-organization toward coherence. Supramolecular chemistry shows that when you let molecules interact under the right constraints, they spontaneously self-assemble into higher order, information-rich structures through recognition, cooperative growth, and built-in termination signals. These are literally programmed to move towards specific organized states rather than generic disorder. Chemicals can do it. People can do it. Work on complex matter and emergent symmetries and condensed phases shows that as systems cool or cross thresholds, new ordered phases and generalized symmetries emerge at low energies, coherent structures that weren't put in by hand at the microscopic level. Taken together, chemical and physical systems, when left to run under suitable conditions, naturally explore and settle into structured attractors that are highly non-random and often efficiency-oriented. Geometry and symmetry breaking. Modern field theory and condensed matter work increasingly describes phases and transitions in terms of emergent symmetries, symmetry breaking, and new effective degrees of freedom that appear as you move along a system's developmental trajectory. Interestingly, everything contains its contradiction, and every effect has an opposite and equal, you know what I mean, the equal and opposite thing. So the more freedom you have, the less choice, in a sense. One of the ways it's been expressed is that do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law does not mean do whatever you want. It actually is kind of equivalent to do God's will and no other, because it's like you determine what your fundamental purpose is and expressing your essence, what that means in relation to the larger system that you're a part of. And the more specialized you are, the more constraints there are on your modalities of expression, right? So someone doing their true will, it is said there's only one action at any given time that's actually lawful for them. So there's this like weird, is and is not kind of thing that's always applicable to the evolutionary processes. But if you're doing your true will, regardless of those generative restraints or dynamical restraints, you're going to be a lot more content with your existence either way. So it's like it's a generative restraint, so it's a positive thing. It's like if you have a big chunk of stone and you want to make a statue, you don't add a bunch of stuff to it. It's you start taking things away from it, That's why we use the term generative restraints to describe generative or the creative mechanisms of things. That's what it says next. That's pretty funny. Modern field theory and condensed matter work increasingly describes phases and transitions in terms of emergent symmetries, symmetry breaking, and new effective degrees of freedom that appear as you move along a system's developmental trajectory. So these trajectories are not arbitrary. The space of possible geometries and orders is constrained by very rigid mathematical structures, group representations, topological changes, etc. The system selects certain low energy, high coherence configurations. So from geometry physics, you get a picture where the universe doesn't just explode into noise. It has a strong bias towards stable, symmetry-laden, hierarchy-building states. Western harmony as a micromodel. Tonal harmony emerges from the harmonic series and the diatonic partitioning of pitch space. This produces a constrained harmonic field, major minor triads, functional relationships that composers then explore and elaborate. As the system develops, common practice, romantic, jazz, etc., it complexifies, but the underlying constraints still favor certain attractors, functional cadences, tension, release cycles, stable versus unstable sonorities, nested hierarchies of consonance and dissonance. The system keeps finding ways to maximize expressive richness while maintaining. That's where we're going. Harmony here behaves like a tiny civilization given certain acoustic and cognitive constraints. It drifts towards structures that optimize coherence, tension management, and expressive capacity rather than collapsing into white noise. So across these domains, chemical self-organization, emergent symmetries in physics, The evolution of tonal systems all show developmental trajectories towards structured, efficient, information-rich order. Civilizations also, hopefully, for fuck's sake. Those trajectories are not forced by external planners. They arise from the intrinsic rules and optimization pressures of the systems themselves. That's the fucking cherry on the dildo of this manifesto. So if humans orient themselves around the same attractor logic, emergent governance would arise naturally, and the fact that it doesn't in our current system points to introduced dissonance. That's consistent with the way non-human systems move towards stable, efficient attractors under favorable conditions. The way even our cultural systems, like harmony, tend to elaborate complexity while preserving deep structural coherence. In that light, the current human race macro system, and remember, if everything is recursive, then we can, this is why music is the ultimate teacher, for example. Because if you want to know how to fix humanity, you can actually just look at like the Western harmony system, understand its functions, and you're like, this is how things are supposed to be structured and how they react. And, nature has given us some blueprints. That's the Bible. That's the fucking Bible. The real Bible is the architectural blueprint of informational, structural, and dynamic systems. That's God's word, And it tells you everything. It tells you what ethics should be. It tells you how governmental systems should be structured, what detractor basins, how to formulate them. You write the song, just like the universe. So, in that light, the current human macro system, persistently amplifying pathological attractors that are visibly suboptimal by the same standards, does look like an anomaly against the background of these developmental patterns, not their straightforward continuation. It's that Tool song where at the end he's just like, let go, let go, let go, let go. That's... it's the one where he's like, ride the spiral to the end. We may just go where no one's been. This is what he was talking about. Ride the spiral of our divinity and still be a human. Damn, we're almost done to where I generated the thumbnail. I don't know if I asked any more questions after that. All right, so we were almost through this segment. There was something we were gonna pick up with something. I don't remember what it was. I'll have to go back and look unless someone remembers in the chat and can let me know. But there was an important question that arose in the course of this. So the last prompt was, how does musical harmonic field evolution mirror universal attractors? The answer is it mirrors them in three big ways: emergence from noise, convergence to efficient structures, and navigation by gravities in a field. So from noise to ordered phases, statistical models show that if you start from disordered sound and let simple constraints operate, interval consonants, memory, pattern reuse, stable phases of harmony self-organize, analogous to crystals emerging from a liquid. Don't fucking tell me that anarchy is not possible. It is our natural state, and it is our sovereign fucking birthright. I have not been under the governance of anything, from my opinion, for my entire life, and I don't steal. I will help you if I can, and I will only hurt you if I have to. And I don't care, really. I'm, on the spectrum enough. My emotional baseline is like, but reason dictates to me that behavior makes sense. And you know why? I've been outside the system since I was fucking born. I have not been part of the pathological fucking attractor basin. that these fucking insane monkeys call society. Statistical models show that if you start from disordered sound and let simple constraints operate, interval constant memory, pattern reuse, stable phases of harmony self-organize, analogous to crystals emerging from a liquid. Historical studies suggest tonal organization passed through discrete stages. Oligotonal. What is oligotonal? Mesotonal and multitonal? We need to look that up, guys. Somebody punch into the chat, please. Copy and paste the definitions of those three. Well, I know what multitonal is, but what is oligo? Well, an oligarchy is one. So that's like one tonal. Meso, what is that, two? Probably. As pitch materials are progressively integrated into coherent systems, again, like a system successively finding deeper attractors in its state space. So harmonic fields don't look designed top down. They look like emergent attractors of an underlying dynamic. Attractors, gravity, and tension. Tonal theory models pitch space with tonal tension and attraction around reference points, tonics, except for when you have maximum choice and maximum dissonance. Then there's no center of gravity. Around reference points where distances in the space correspond to perceived tension and the pull to resolve. This tonal gravity can be derived from acoustics, harmonic series, and cognitive constraints. Tones closer to simple overtone relationships are more stable. Holy shit. The overtones are generated naturally. Those are the most stable. I just hadn't thought about that in this context. Others function as high tension attractors that demand motion. And that quality increases as you differentiate from the overtone series. In other words, shit becomes increasingly unnatural. And this is one of the issues I think that like modern people have when they hear that kind of language, right? We're not talking about girls with hairy armpits and everyone smelling like patchouli and only eating vegan food when I say returning to nature. It's got nothing to do with abandoning technology. That's not in my, you know what I mean? That's not on the table at all. I want nothing to do with any of that shit. You know what I mean? And neither do most of the rest of us. I mean, patchouli's fine. If you don't shave your arms, I don't hate you. I'm probably not going to like date you. But you know, we're definitely friends. You know what I mean? Like, it's not about that at all. It's just about understanding that God's laws are fucking emergent and that we should follow them, you know? And I hope you guys understand that when I use that word, I don't even know exactly how I mean it, you know, but it works. Fucking hippies, man. That's structurally the same as an attractor landscape. Local minima, stable chords, cadences, and slopes. Voice leading paths define how the system naturally moves. Langrian action applies in music. All the physical laws that work in the universe have correlations in functional harmony. All of them. There's even a correlation to antimatter called negative harmony. Developmental trajectory and optimization. Evolutionary accounts argue that tonal organization incrementally optimized neural mechanisms for encoding complex relationships, with triads and heptatonic pentatonic schemes emerging as efficient ways to symbolize the world. No. Not exactly. Those things were expressed like in the form of causal law and systems dynamics made audible. It's not just symbolic expressions of something. Scale and tuning systems can be modeled as solutions to optimization problems. They are those things, but okay. Degrees cluster near local minima of dissonance curve, producing familiar scales as attractors in an abstract space of possible tunings. So harmonic evolution behaves like a search process over a huge possibility space, converging as configurations that maximize expressive power and cognitive economic efficiency under constraints. Mirroring universal attractors. Across physics, chemistry, and harmony, physical systems you observe spontaneous emergence of ordered, low energy, symmetry rich phases from high symmetry, disordered conditions. Chemical soft matter systems, supramolecular self organization by recognition, cooperation, and controlled termination into complex yet robust structures. And in harmonic systems, emergence of tonal centers, consonants, hierarchies, and functional progressions from raw pitch state, organizing musical matter into stable yet flexible patterns. In all three, you can read the trajectory as movement through an attractor landscape towards states that are low energy in effort, dissonance, or uncertainty, high coherence, and high capacity for further complexification. Harmony is essentially a sonic microcosm of that universal pattern. So, ChatGPT and this thing came up with the exact same conclusion, basically, which is all. This just turned into way more than I had signed up for. And I'm glad because, we need to understand all this stuff. And, it's not just this that I'm hedging my bets on. You guys haven't seen a fragment of it yet. The extrapolations, I guess, from Western harmony that I've been working on for the last week, and I mean like 12 hours a day, and this disciplinary pattern compression, it's an endless fucking rabbit hole. And of course it would be, because it's all a hologram. So it goes everywhere and anywhere you want it to go, and it all just keeps, superimposing, because it is all derived from the same generative mechanisms, the same recursive processes. Yeah, Democritus. Did they name democracy after that guy too? Who was this cat? So what was the mesotonality? I think I figured it out, but let's see. Mesotonality. And then there was another question that was really important that came up. Described as a dynamic synthesis or trialectic system that moves beyond the traditional contradiction between tonality and atonality. This came before multitonality. What? The system incorporates non-octave spaces, microintervals, and infrafrequential sound, which is subfrequency, referencing the ideas of composers like Ivan Vyshengrodsky. The system includes an 11-term metatonic scale within an 1100 cent range as opposed to the 12-term 1200 cent chromatic scale, exploring equisavas, dilated or strict octaves, and a metatonal constant of 3.666. No, the number 666 is really important in Western music theory too. And if you guys saw the Dalbelson Musica thing, or if you didn't, I'll tell you a little bit about it. The tritone, Dalbelson Musica, the 6th and the 13th, and how that led to the understanding of like maximal symmetries in 2D space, and how, once a system reaches its maximum symmetry, there's a system frustration, and asymmetry is basically what leads to the recursion at the next octave. And anyways, the Lucifer myth is told by the 6th degree of the scale and all of its structure and function. And Lucifer is the angel of music. So that was wild to see. I just have a hard time believing that this weird. Wait a minute. Did I put the wrong? No, it's the right thing. Medicinality. Yeah. It's hard to believe that came first. All right, I'm gonna open Perplexity back up and look for whatever it is that, because I really wanted that question answered. If anyone remembers what it was, let me know in the chat. Otherwise, I'm gonna try to find it. I just have no idea. What it was. Man, it was a good question. Anyways, if anyone remembers or wants to go back and, like, if you remember where in the stream it was that I stopped and I was like, oh yeah, we gotta, when we're done, we gotta find out what this is about. Please pop it in the chat. Man, I'm really disappointed I forgot what it was. But if you guys have any questions or subjects you'd like to pop in the chat, I can hang out for a little while longer. If we attain a high enough awareness, can we incarnate into our next body without forgetting everything again? Yeah, I think I did that, honestly. I mean, not to the extent that, I came out of the womb like, oh, I wish I could go back to the lock and, chill at Beluskin again or whatever, but yeah, to some extent that's definitely possible. The problem is we never know for sure. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. One of them is that genetic memory is a real thing. So if you're related to someone from the past, you can potentially access their memories. If there is a Akashic record type field, which is pretty much a certainty at this point, the conformal cyclic or cyclic conformal theory, I can't remember what the order is, or conformal cyclic cosmology theory of Penrose, basically is the idea that the universe generates all of this stuff, and then once it reaches its omega point, and there is nothing else, no more potential that can be fulfilled, like a systems node reaching its maximum point of informational density, it collapses, which is what would happen. And so it retains all that information and uses it as a blueprint to build the next regeneration, which is an improvement on the last one. And we see that it reflected in, biological evolution and all sorts of other things. So, that seems to be probably the reality, I think. But what that means is that there's all the information from all of the previous regenerations, which are almost identical to this one. There's just little tiny, implements or incremental changes from regeneration to regeneration. So some resonant bleed could occur. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way to be sure that reincarnation is even a real thing. We might live the same life over and over and over again. The thing is, we can kind of use reason as a guide when we're navigating the metaphysical morass to an extent, because there's going to be a reason for everything. Nothing just happens. Nothing is, I'm not going to say there is such thing as chance. There has to be, in order for there to be asymmetry and movement and choice and stuff, and there is that. But it's like 50-50. And whether or not things are actually really chance depends a little bit on your vantage point at the time, because everything contains its contradiction due to the fact that the point of reference for all of the recursive generations in the universe is a paradox. So that's why it's all paradoxical. So it's chance and it's not chance. It's order and it's not order. It's order and it's disorder. It's good and it's evil. These things are all true and false, and it is both true and false to say that they are true and false. And there's a reason for the... I always have a hard time saying this word for some reason. Epistemological. There are limits to what you can know, and there's good reason for that. If you... I always use the analogy of a particle. If you try to observe it, like, the more precisely you try to pin down measurement, the more unknowable the object becomes, and what that tells me is that there are epistemological guardrails that are built into the design of the universe. One of the reasons is that the fulfillment of all possibilities and potentials has something to do with the information density maxima, So once everything that can be known is known, the universe is destroyed, basically. And so there are epistemological guardrails against that happening prematurely, And that's part of the reason why you're not really ever going to know if reincarnation is real or not. Like, I have all kinds of memories from someone else's life. Our mothers said the same shit to us, like highly specific things, like, claim that we read the Bible by age 4.5, and, a girl bedding a girl in our mom's bed at 15, and an earring fell out, and that's how we got caught. Tragedy on the same day at the same age, where everyone involved was the same age in both stories. I mean, just on, it's like almost the exact pattern in the, like, archetypal blueprint or something. Obviously it's not the same in every detail at all, but it's really difficult to dismiss it as like nothing. But at the same time, I have English heritage, he was English, and there's a lot of other possibilities in terms of like why I could recite his books before having read them and stuff, Yep. 1 a.m. I can tell, like, these streams are basically over when my brain stops firing on all cylinders. So I appreciate you guys. Please consider sharing this shit. The algorithm hates me. And the only way to get around it is through manual sharing. And I'll see you guys tomorrow afternoon. We're going to talk about ayahuasca a little bit, because when I came back from the jungle, I was still pretty tired for one thing, but I didn't explain the black ayahuasca mystery to my own satisfaction, and it's not that big of a deal, but it just gave me the idea that we should talk about all of the different subspecies of copy and Elysia. And, for example, I forgot to mention that the reason that the Banisteriopsis subspecies that turn black can be used interchangeably with the Elysia species is they're both Malphagisae, and the black bleeding is associated with the alkaloid that gives them the effect that makes them black ayahuasca. It doesn't matter whether, the only difference is that one has harmalas and the other doesn't. And for some reason, I never explained that in the stream when I got back from the jungle. Why? So anywho, thank you guys so much. Please consider supporting us, and I'll see you tomorrow. Oh, also, if you're a patron, we're doing the Discord tomorrow night.